The Oversight Committee will come to order. We have a quorum sufficient to begin opening statements. We will note when we have a quorum sufficient to have votes. I might note that we plan on rolling votes, and as we get into it, the ranking member and I will announce how that will proceed. The committee meets today to consider H.R. 3813, the Securing Annuities for Federal Employees Act of 2012. H.R. 3902, the District of Columbia Special Election Reform Act, and I might pay special attention and thank the gentlelady when she arrives for working tirelessly and quickly to make that available, and several other postal namings. The committee will now consider H.R. 3813, the Securing Annuities for Federal Employees Act of 2012, and I recognize myself for a short opening statement. The Federal Government has not had to adapt to the economic realities that the rest of America has been grappling with for years. Federal wages, currently frozen, may be too high or too low. We are not here to decide that today, but rather to recognize that back-end loading of pension funds continues to be a question of, does it get us value, is it appreciated, and is it fair? Additionally, this committee grapples, I might note specifically, with pension and other deferred benefits for postal workers, and more than any other area, in their case, in a shrinking environment, is threatening the very viability of the post office. Our amendment to our bill today seeks to broadly change for future and only for future employees the bargain they will have with government. That bargain will standardize and harmonize, consistent with CBO's scoring, the payroll deductions and the long-term benefits of retirement. And I might note particularly that law enforcement has received a smaller, although proportional, cut, and we did so for a reason, in that attracting and retaining law enforcement is particularly an area of sensitivity because of their mandated short duration of their careers as a rule. But notwithstanding that, everyone else is going to be at the end of this in the same boat. And particularly I might note that for members of Congress and for staff of Congress, House, Senate, and the like, we will, including CBO, we will be slashing in half the long-term benefit. We don't do that lightly, but in recognition that, in fact, we in Congress and our staffs have had a different deal for a long time. There may be good reasons for it, but the fact is the American people want us to live under the same laws and benefits as the more broadly considered for members of Congress. The bill we're marking up today, H.R. 3813, is a continuation of the effort to advance recommendation from the President's Fiscal Commission and to bring more balance and fairness to the system that is out of touch with the economic realities that face us here today. Before I recognize the ranking member for his opening statement, I believe that everyone should understand that the scoring on this bill, although real, does not change the reality that when we want to recruit new employees, we will do so based on the total compensation package. If the portion of the change that is being considered here today has a material effect on that consideration, then the market forces will take effect. As we consider amendments, I want to make it clear that we believe that some of the back-end benefits are underappreciated and certainly not particularly appreciated by the vast majority of Americans who do not have a defined benefit plan that guarantees them both a percentage of their earnings and automatic cost of living. So although these cuts are significant, I recognize that the CBO scoring can only assume same pay, lesser benefits. I certainly would make that known. And lastly, the CBO scoring only includes the additional pay-in. If one were to score the long-term obligation of the Federal Government to pay pensions in the future, the savings would be dramatic. This is one of the problems. People only look at what they pay in and what they receive in a day. If people were to look at what would happen in 30 years in the way of future obligation or lesser future obligation, they would appreciate that pay as you go, receive your money now, make your investment decisions now, has real value, particularly at a time in which Social Security and other areas of defined benefit are so much in peril. And with that, I look forward to a lively but successful markup and recognize the ranking member for his opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. H.R. 3813 would make substantial changes to the Federal Employee Retirement System, even though that system is fully funded. This legislation is a solution in search of a problem, intended, as far as I can see, only to further reduce the take-home pay of middle-class American workers, employees who are already operating under a pay freeze. Despite its title, H.R. 3813 will make retirees less secure than they are now. H.R. 3813 would create a great uncertainty among employees close to the age of 62 who are considering early retirement. For decades, many of these employees have been relying on the promise of a FERS annuity supplement, which is currently available to those who retire before age 62, before they are eligible for Social Security. But this legislation would eliminate those supplements. The bill would also reduce the take-home pay of millions of middle-class workers. If this legislation becomes law, Federal employees will see a 1.5% decrease in their take-home pay as a result of the bill's cuts to the government portion of their retirement payments. The bill would also reduce retirement benefits for new employees who join the civil service by switching from a high 3 to a high 5 and lowering the pension formula multiplier by almost 35%. This legislation would yield an annuity that is worth 40% less than current annuities. Republicans argue that we should adopt this bill because it includes some of the same ideas proposed by President Obama. No, President Obama has called for a shared sacrifice. His call for everyone to do their part to address the nation's deficits. He's called for everyone to step up, including people who make billions of dollars a year and yet are taxed at effective rates that are lower than their secretaries. As a result of the pay freeze already in place, the families of middle-class Federal employees have contributed $60 billion to deficit reduction. According to the Congressional Budget Office, H.R. 3813 would require them to sacrifice another $40 billion over the next 10 years. Let me make it crystal clear. If this legislation is passed, middle-class Federal workers will take a $100 billion hit at a time when millionaires and billionaires have not been asked to contribute one single additional penny towards reducing the nation's debt. How is this shared sacrifice? It isn't. This is sticking it to millions of middle-class American families who are struggling to make ends meet. The legislation continues a disturbing assault on our Federal employees, an assault spearheaded by this committee, which has previously marked up legislation that would dramatically and indiscriminately reduce the size of the Federal workforce, extend the probationary period for new hires, limit the use of official time, and reduce benefits for workers who are injured on the job. We constantly hear rhetoric from the other side that Federal employees are valuable and their service is so honored. But the actions of the majority make one wonder how much they really believe that. These employees protect our borders, safeguard our food supply, care for our own wounded veterans, and support our war fighters. And this is how they are treated. I strongly oppose this legislation, and I urge all of my colleagues to do the same. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman, and I will hold the record open until the end of the day for all members to submit written statements. We now open the bill, H.R. 3813, for consideration. Without objection, H.R. 3813 will be considered as read and open for amendment at any point. The text has already been distributed and is in each of your individual folders. The clerk will designate the bill.
H.R. 3813, a bill to amend Title V United States Code to secure the annuities of Federal civilian employees and for other purposes.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment in the nature of a substitute.
The amendment has been distributed. Without objection, the amendment will be considered as read and original text for purposes of amendment. The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Ross, the chairman of the subcommittee on the Federal Workforce, is recognized for 5 minutes to explain his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members, last month the Federal Workforce Subcommittee examined options to reform the Federal pension system to bring it more in line with the private sector workforce and help balance the budget. According to Towers Watson, only 13 of this year's Fortune 100 companies offered new employees a traditional defined benefit plan in 2011, compared to 58 companies in 2003. Employee benefits of Federal employees cost 48% more than those received by the private sector, and according to a Congressional Budget Office report just released last week. Average benefits for Federal workers with no more than a high school diploma were 72% higher than for their private sector counterparts. Federal employees entering the service after 1984 received both a defined benefit and a defined contribution plan on top of Social Security benefits. Worse, members of Congress currently receive a pension benefit that is much more generous than that received by the rest of the Federal workforce. According to the Office of Personnel Management, the average annual pension for those retiring from Congress was $53,940 in 2010. To put it in perspective, the average Social Security recipient receives $14,000 per year. And according to the Employee Benefit Research Institute, about half of all private sector workers have no retirement plan other than Social Security. The Federal retirement system has an unfunded liability of $68.7 billion for 2011. The unfunded liability stems from the fact that the Civil Service Retirement System and Disability Fund is not a store of wealth for the Federal Government. The pension fund represents budget authority, and when pension benefits are dispersed by the government must raise an equivalent amount of cash by increasing taxes or borrowing money from the public. In other words, it's just like the trust fund full of IOUs that is in the Social Security Trust Fund. It is clear that the taxpayers cannot afford to continue to maintain the current Federal pension cost structure over the long term. The recent economic crisis has made State and local governments painfully aware that their generous pension benefits were unsustainable and unfair to taxpayers. In the past 10 years, 29 States and 32 local governments have reformed their retirement programs to ensure that future benefits would still be around for current employees. Elected officials and public sector unions at the State and local level have shown real leadership by passing reforms creating more affordable and sustainable benefit structures. Congress needs to follow that leadership shown all across the nation and face the difficult but necessary task of reforming the Federal Government's pension system. In 2010, President Obama's Deficit Reduction Commission recommended increasing the amount Federal employees pay toward their retirement and to start calculating their pensions using as a base average of an employee's highest 5-year earnings, not 3-year earnings, which is currently in use. Last December, the House of Representatives passed 3630, which called for the reform of Federal pension system that would make it more comparable to private sector pension systems. The pension reforms passed by the House would have saved taxpayers $38 billion, according to the Congressional Budget Office. The bill included the recommendations of the President's Deficit Commission to increase employee retirement contributions, eliminated the supplemental payment to individuals who voluntarily retire before age 62, and made further prospective changes to the pension formula new Federal employees would receive. The bill passed the House and applied to all applied to all members of Congress and their staff. Unfortunately, the Senate has refused to adopt these reforms. Believe me, my bill is not in one bit about beating up the Federal employees or even members of Congress. It is about living in the real world, a world where defined benefit plans are disappearing and market-driven solutions like the Federal TSP are on the rise. Protecting the taxpayer and ensuring reasonable retirements for Federal workers is our primary goal. But a deeper reality should set in here in Washington. The American people are demanding from their elected representatives a willingness to live under the laws that they pass. They are tired of the perks and hypocrisy they witness in the Congress and are rightfully outraged by the pension benefits guaranteed to a Federal workforce which has grown too large. Such benefits are paid for through an ever-increasing tax burden on the American worker. Too many hardworking Americans watch their pensions evaporate because of the economic consequences of debt and borrowing caused in part by these unsustainable promises. The way to ensure both value to the taxpayer and security to the Federal worker is to adopt a fair, affordable pension system created by the bill in the form of this amendment today before the committee. H.R. 13 would increase the employee and member contribution to retirement by 1.5% of salary over 3 years. It would also eliminate the supplemental payment to individuals who voluntarily retire before age 62, and for new hires, it increases the employee retirement contribution by 3.2%, changes the multiplier used in the pension formula, and uses a 5-year average salary base. And all of these reforms would apply equally to members of Congress and Federal employees. I sincerely hope this is just the beginning of a reform year in which we make our government, including those of us in this Congress, more accountable. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman yields back. Do any members wish to speak on the bill? The ranking member is recognized for 5 minutes.
I won't take that long, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, although I still remain opposed to the bill, I will not object to the adoption of this amendment, which makes minor technical corrections to the bill. With that, I'll yield back.
I thank the gentleman. If there is no further discussion, the question is on the amendment. I'll ask one more time. Any other members wish to speak on the bill? The gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I will be brief. I believe this is the 15th or 16th hearing we've had on the assault of Federal workers. Under the guise of trying to regularize congressional benefits, we, of course, are using this legislation to get at the Federal employee. And what we're doing is breaking faith with the terms of employment. In good faith, millions of our fellow Americans responded to public service. Some of them are still active, some of them are retired. And the deal was this benefit package. Arbitrarily, without any kind of in-depth study, without any kind of analysis saying that this is, as we look to the future, the way to go, we are superimposing our judgment for the practice of the past and the promise made that we are now going to break. In my honest opinion, when you disparage public employees, you actually do a disservice to the constituents they serve, because the ultimate loser isn't really the Federal employee. It is that constituent who won't get the VA service, who won't have their Social Security request processed in a timely manner, who won't have the confidence in a secure drug supply in America when they need pharmaceuticals. And I just think what we're about today, has crossed the line from disparaging maybe to almost sadism. I think it's very unfortunate. I think it does a disservice to the wonderful men and women who serve this country and our constituents. I think we are breaking faith today. I'm going to oppose this with every fiber of my being, and it is my fond hope that this bill will die an agonizing death in the United States Senate should it get that far. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Anyone else seek recognition? The gentleman from Ohio?
Mr. Chairman, I would be happy to yield to the Chairman.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. To my colleagues, especially those who sound like Chicken Little, let me tell you what this bill is about, including Mr. Conley. This bill makes no changes to current employees except those who would like to take advantage of a not guaranteed but historically offered early retirement. Now, I will concede that, in fact, if you are viewing early retirement, this could have an impact on you. Obviously, we are asking current employees to contribute a small amount of additional toward their retirement. Again, there was no guarantee stipulated never to be changed when they came to work. The vast majority of the changes and the substantive change that really matters here, including the 5 years, came out of the President's well-thought-out and well-researched decisions. The decision to go from 3 to 5 is not just a money savings. It's a more accurate representation of the true end-of-career pay enjoyed by many of us here at the dais. The history of gaming the last 3 years to distort the actual typical pay is not insignificant in this committee's proven and documented history. What you make during most of your career, or the average over your entire career averaged for inflation, in fact would be less than your high 5, and everyone knows it. So I would appreciate that members carefully evaluate whether or not we're really breaking a trust. I might just note that Mr. Ross said it very well, but as a Californian, I'll make it personal. California finds itself in huge financial peril because although they funded their pension, they're now playing catch-up on longer life and lower returns. The Federal pension is not, contrary to Mr. Cummings' statement, is not fully paid for. There's not a penny in it. Only the Postal Service actually pays in real money, and even that money is just an IOU from the government, because ultimately everyone in this room, if we're going to be genuine to the truth, understands all of Social Security has been spent. All of Medicare has been spent. All of Federal pensions have been spent. All of the postal deposits have been spent. There is nothing but an IOU to be paid by future generations for all of these defined benefit plans. I'm not a hardliner, but let's be honest. There's not a pack of money sitting there, and unless we begin being more on a pay-as-you-go basis and a less as on a our children will pay for basis, we stand with a real problem for the future generations. And I'm not trying to just lecture to myself. Hopefully we all get it, that we can make changes in this bill. We can make changes in Federal pay. But if we just continue to assume that defined benefit plans going out for 75 years don't cost future generations, we do so at a peril of the future competitiveness of our nation. So I know that wasn't the intent of Mr. Conley when he specified how it was going, but I felt that way. And I know, Mr. Cummings, that you were being accurate in every possible way. But we really did try to put together a package that could be a starting point toward reducing future obligations, knowing, as I said in my opening statement, that we likely will, in some cases, make adjustments to pay in order to recruit and retain good people. But remember, it's recruit and retain future people. The fact is that for the next 30 years, the big chunk of the Federal workforce will operate under the old system. And they will be the beneficiary of pay raises, in some cases, given to retain and to recruit new people. So this is not all about savings today. It is about, in my opinion, savings that our children or grandchildren will appreciate. I hope everyone will understand I say this because I'm very passionate about finding ways to change how government defers obligations to future generations. I yield back and thank the gentleman from Ohio. Mr. Lynch is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the Chairman. I agree that the Chairman is very passionate, but he's also very wrong on his argument. Let me just point it out. Look, under the old system, CSRS, he was absolutely right. It was far too generous, and back in 1986, with the help of President Reagan, they changed to a whole new system. However, we still have a lingering unfunded obligation with respect to those employees who are still there. And the gentleman is absolutely right. That is creating a lot of pressure on the existing trust fund, which is basically co-mingled with the new system. But the gentleman's point that he made, that it's going to get worse and worse, and we're going to leave this obligation to future generations, is wrong-headed. Look, those people who worked before 1986 will become an ever-shrinking number within the Federal workforce, and retired members as well, while new members under a much less generous system will be the overwhelming balance of it. Right now, there are about 500,000 people who were part of that 1986 group, the CSRS group, out of I think it's 2.2 million. So as time goes on, they will become a smaller and smaller group within that system, and so the way FERS, the Federal Retirement System, the new system, the less generous system, is constructed, there is virtually no unfunded liability with respect to the people in that. It's funded as they go along. It's not like it was under the CSRS system. So that does not present a lingering obligation like the old CSRS system. And I just want to make sure people realize we're going to the wider argument. We're at the end of the second full year of freezes for federal employees, and there's obviously a proposition that we extended to a third year of freeze. And while I understand we are in difficult financial straits, the President's recommendation is for a 0.5% increase. We're not talking about huge gains here for people if we take the President's position. He's talking about a 0.5% increase, and under those circumstances, I think we realize that even if we take the President's position, we're not going to help materially the position of federal employees going forward. What we're trying to do is recognize the cuts that they've already absorbed, recognize that they've tried to shoulder some of the burden. They're on year 2 of a pay freeze. And as I said, even if the President's position is supported, they're looking at a 0.5%, 0.5% increase going forward in the coming year. So, we're going to have a situation here where, which I think is developing, where serving in the federal government, serving as a public servant, doing some pretty important work is going to become less and less desirable. We're not going to be able to get the quality of employee that we would like to do the work that's necessary to support our troops, to take care of our veterans. Those are all federal employees, to work at the DEA, work at FBI, to do all of the things that need to be done to regulate the financial services industry, which has already wrecked this country, and is the principal reason why we're in this dilemma that we're in. There are consequences to really downgrading and demeaning public service in this country. And for all those reasons, I oppose the bill that's here before us today, and I support
Would the gentleman yield?
Amendment. I've got 18 seconds. I'll happy to yield.
I want to agree with the gentleman, although there's no amendment yet up except the underlying one. I agree with the gentleman that pay freezes are not a long-term solution to how to recruit and retain the best and the brightest, and that all of us need to start thinking about what the correct pay is, not arbitrary pay freezes, that ultimately at some point you will retain people who have nowhere else to go, and you will lose the best and the brightest. You will lose the most needed skills. So although that's not the subject here today, I do want to associate myself with your comments on the fact that pay freezes as a tool only are a short-term tool. Thank the gentleman.